Welcome, everyone, to the Lee Schools TV podcast. Joining us today is Fort Myers High School senior Dahlia Dry. Dahlia, you're the first student guest on the podcast, so thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
I've been looking forward to this for a while, and you are a science fair whiz, champ. I don't know how to, how you would describe it, but I'm just going to go through your kind of list of accomplishments over the past couple of years before we begin to kind of give the people watching and listening an idea of what you've been working on and what you've been doing the past couple of years. So in 2017, you were awarded Best of Fair Award for the Thomas Alva Edison Regional Science and Engineering Fair here locally. You placed first in the Mathematics and Computer Science category. You got a $2,500 FGCU scholarship. And then later you went on to place third in Math and Computer Science in the State Science and Engineering Fair. And then fourth place in the International State and Engineering Fair. That was 2 years ago. And then last year, Best of Fair again in the Regional Science and Engineering Fair. First place, Math and Computer Science. You were the keynote speaker at the State Science and Engineering Fair. You placed first in Math and Computer Science at the State Science Fair this past year. And then you went on to place fourth again in the International Science and Engineering Fair. Quite a list of accomplishments in the past 2 years.
Yeah, thank you. Been busy.
And you also told me that you didn't start getting involved in science fair until sophomore year of high school. Is that right?
Yeah.
Did you ever think that you would become this accomplished? When you were, say, a freshman in high school, did you ever think you'd get this far?
I had absolutely no idea. I kind of got into science fair on accident. Because I've sailed since 8th grade. I do like regattas around the state and stuff. And so I have a lot of fun with that. And it initially started as me picking up a book on coding in Barnes & Noble. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I started coding. And then I started thinking about sailing. And I was like, oh, maybe I can, figure out a way to like win more races. Just kind of as like a fun type of thing. And then I ended up using like support vector machines and time series analysis, and it got really in depth. So I was like, might as well, give science fair a shot. And, little did I know, here I am today.
Yeah. So you said, when was that you picked up that book on coding? Sophomore year, you said?
It would have been the end of my freshman year.
Okay. So before that, did you have a strong interest, in elementary and through middle school in science? You said you were into sailing, you said?
Yeah.
So, did you have a strong interest before high school?
I did. Yeah. When I was 10 years old, we moved to Sanibel, and my parents started out a restaurant out there. And so I basically grew up there. Like most of the childhood that I remember is on Sanibel, and just, biking around, and like 80% of the island is nature preserve. So you kind of develop like this curiosity about nature at a young age. And so I think that was what really started it for me. And then, of course, they have the dark sky ordinance out there, so you can see the stars like definitely more than you can in Fort Myers. And so, I ended up reading Cosmos. That was when my astronomy interest really started. I read Cosmos, and my imagination was just captured by that. And so I'd been interested in astronomy for a while, but it wasn't until science fair that I discovered how to explore it for myself.
Yeah. So the project that you did last year that you placed fourth in the International Science and Engineering Fair for, I'm just going to read the title. It was called Challenging Limitations Using Deep Learning, Time Series Analysis, and Statistical Methods for Noise Reduction to Develop an Innovative Approach to Exoplanet Candidate Detection Using Earth-Based Telescopes. So two things jumped out at me after reading that. First was, wow, that's a long title. What the heck does that mean? And second is that it also made me really want to learn what it is. Can you explain to me what your project was on? In layman's terms for
absolutely.
us who aren't as experienced in astronomy as you are.
Yeah, with the clarity of hindsight, it definitely could have been a shorter title, but that's another story. So my project was essentially taking something that I'd thought about for a long time. So like I said, I grew up interested in astronomy, but from a layman's perspective, it's kind of hard to figure out ways to research astronomy for yourself without knowing like really, really advanced physics or like having access to some super big telescope. So I think it's definitely not as accessible as a field as say biology or chemistry. You know, we have great resources here. You can go to labs and stuff. Astronomy, it's not really the same. And so that was what it kind of started out as. And so I was
Making it
essentially
more accessible.
exactly, and making astronomy more accessible. And so it kind of stemmed from that into exploring the Kepler exoplanet data, which is all free and available online for people to research and write papers off of.
So what's an exoplanet for the people who don't know?
Absolutely.
Like me.
So an exoplanet is any planet orbiting a star that's not our sun. So just planets outside of our own solar system. And so the main way we find exoplanets is using what's called light curves. And these are essentially graphs of the brightness of a star over time. And so when a planet passes between a star and us, we can actually see a dip in that star's brightness that lets us know that there's a planet in its orbit. And so this method is kind of flawed. We usually only discover the bigger planets, obviously, because we can see them more in the light curves. But it's the way we've discovered most of the 4,000 and change exoplanets that we know of today.
Wow.
And so I designed a neural net, and that's essentially like a computer algorithm that can, I hesitate to say think for itself, but that's essentially what you're going for. It is a very highly advanced analytical tool for analyzing data. And so I took these neural nets and I applied them to the light curves to analyze them and see if there were, to be able to detect the presence of exoplanets in the light curves that I was looking at. And from there, I adapted those light curves, which are, of course, they're collected by the Kepler Space Telescope, which has been decommissioned recently. But the thing about space telescopes is that they don't have to look through our atmosphere, so they have a lot less noise to deal with. The only problem with that is that there's a very limited number of space telescopes. So with the Kepler mission, our field of view for looking for new exoplanets was incredibly limited. It's only a really small portion of the sky. And so I aim to kind of try to use Earth-based telescopes to make those observations that Kepler was making by overcoming that central obstacle of the noise that you get when you're observing from Earth. So using the neural net that I designed, I simulated Kepler light curves that were statistically representative of Kepler, and then I basically amplified the noise in them to make them really hard to read, to kind of simulate what you would get if you were observing from Earth. And then I adapted my neural net, did a bunch of statistics essentially, and tried to still come out with a product that can analyze those light curves, find new exoplanets, despite the data being impaired to mimic Earth conditions.
And how did it turn out?
It turned out really well. So I
guess because you won a bunch of awards.
I think my algorithm had around an 85% successful classification rate, meaning that 85% of the time it could still tell whether there was an exoplanet orbiting in a given light curve. And so
was that better than you had hoped for? Or?
Yeah, I had no clue what to hope for going into it.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a good result. I was kind of aiming for anything above 50, because 50 would just be guessing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it turned out well.
So basically you designed this neural net to help or to improve Earth-based telescopes' abilities to detect, through all that noise, through the atmosphere, their ability to detect exoplanets.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So was that your first project that you did that, kind of propelled you into the science fair world of people that go really far in the science fair? That was your first, but that was last year. That was last year. Sorry. What'd you do junior year?
So junior year, I did that project that was inspired by sailing. So I essentially wanted to predict wind shifts, because when you're sailing in a race, if you can tell that the wind's going to shift, then you go along a certain side of the course, and you can usually end up being way ahead of everyone else. That's usually how you win. And so I figured, maybe if I can see the future, then I can, win more races and stuff. And so it just started out like that. And I used time series analysis. It's called autoregressive integrated moving average modeling, and support vector machines, which are a type of artificial intelligence, to analyze wind data that I collected. I built this little really cheap Raspberry Pi apparatus connected to a wind vane, so you can tell what direction the wind's going. And I just took a bunch of data and essentially extrapolated. to see the future wind shifts with a pretty good degree of accuracy. So that was that project. Yeah.
Cool. Going back to your telescope project, did you make a discovery that a lot of people were interested in further researching?
Well, the interesting thing is that at the time that I was doing that, Kepler was virtually our only space telescope that was really getting a lot of data on exoplanets. And now, a few months ago, we launched TESS. And so TESS is the new generation of space exploration. It's going to explore essentially the entire sky in a window of a few years to find new exoplanets. And so we basically just had this huge leap forward in the field. And so what I was doing is trying to solve that problem of, the immense cost of space telescopes and our limited field of view. And so part of that is going to be solved in the future by TESS. But it's still, I think people found it interesting that we were still able to classify the data despite such noisy conditions. And I think that was what was really innovative about the project, is that I wasn't trying to get the best observational equipment possible, which usually in astronomy you want the most precise data possible. But I essentially provided evidence to support the idea that we have such advanced analytic tools nowadays in the form of like neural nets and things that we can compromise some of the precision of our instruments and still have really accurate results, which would essentially allow us to really expand the scope of the things that we're exploring by not just always trying to get the most precise equipment, the most expensive equipment, and the most limited equipment essentially.
Cool. So what was it like? So last year at the International Science and Engineering Fair, it was in Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah.
So what was that experience like for you? Had you ever been there before?
I'd never been to Pittsburgh before.
But you had been to an international science fair.
Yeah.
Where was it the year before?
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles. Okay. So were they both similar or both pretty different?
They were both similar. I mean, it's a different experience every time around. The first time I went, it was like a truly magical experience. It was crazy. I mean, I had never been across the country before. And so we land in LA and it's just like this whole nother world. And you walk down the street in like downtown LA and they have this huge convention center with like a big banner on it. And it's like Intel International Science and Engineering Fair. And you're just like, like, whoa, this is, I'm here. I'm here for this. And so, it was just an amazing experience. And Pittsburgh was just the same. I mean, they really go out of their way to just make it like the coolest thing ever.
So is it like a big convention center? How many different students take part in these international science fairs?
I've forgotten the figures. I
Thousands?
I think it's around 1,500 kids from like 80 plus countries, regions, and stuff like that. Yeah. Don't quote me on that, though.
It's okay. I won't. And you were the keynote speaker at the state science and engineering fair last year. Well, I guess it was 2018 still, so still this year. But what did they ask you if you wanted to speak? How did that come about? And were you excited to do it? Nervous?
Well, it's a program called so it's the Jason Colloquium, and it stands for Junior and Senior Outstanding Narratives. And essentially, it's like by application. And I wasn't considering applying, but then Mr. Hughes, who's our science fair coordinator here, had nominated me. And so essentially, they just ask you to send in what your speech would be, and then they pick you based on that. And so my speech was called Math, the Story of an Unrequited Love. And it was basically about how I've always really loved math, but I haven't, I'm not really the best at it. It's not what I'm naturally skilled at. And so I had always loved astronomy, but I wasn't really sure if I could be like an astrophysicist because, I don't have like the intuition to be the one who's like writing equations on boards, having that eureka moment. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of where I was until I did science fair. And I went to internationals and I saw all of these amazing projects and I realized that, I already had this knack for computer science. I could combine that with my love for astronomy. And so that spawned my whole 2018 project. And so it was really just a speech about how science fair has broadened my horizons in such an amazing way and, allowed me to pursue my passion.
So your interest in science kind of opened up a newfound interest in math?
Yeah. I mean, I always just kind of enjoyed math just because it's like a puzzle.
Yeah.
And I like puzzles because, I'm a nerd. And so I just really love, solving problems and doing math homework. And it doesn't always come naturally to me. I mean, I have tons of friends who are like crazy good at math, like way better than I am, but I still enjoy it nonetheless. And so, yeah.
Yeah. How much math is there in computer science and astronomy? Is there a lot, or?
Astronomy is a lot of math,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
astrophysics. That's it's a lot of math, especially theoretical astrophysics. But there's computational and observational astrophysics, which is more different skill sets there. Computer science, there is some math, but I would say it's more logic, and so that works really well to me. I mean, I guess it's like the puzzle solving aspect, but without the math. Yeah.
So, okay, so you said you moved to Sanibel when you were how old?
I would have been 9.
9. Okay.
Yeah.
Where did you live before that?
We lived in Naples.
Naples. Okay, so you're
Yeah.
born and raised Southwest Florida.
Yeah.
Okay. And where'd you go to elementary and middle school?
The Sanibel School.
Okay, that makes sense. So you said when did you kind of first realize that you were really interested in science, and how did that come about? Or was it a gradual thing? I know you said you picked up that book on coding and that kind of propelled things, but did something happen that you were interested in when you were really young?
I think I've always really just loved like learning about nature and stuff.
Yeah, you mentioned growing up on Sanibel and the stars.
Yeah, that stuff. But I think it would have been 7th grade, and I read Cosmos, and all of a sudden science wasn't just like this like problem solving like mathy sort of thing. It was also something that was like really, really beautiful and like amazing. And so I think that was what did it. Yeah.
So going back to that speech you gave, what was how many, kind of paint us a picture? What was that like? Did you get up on a stage and there was hundreds of people? What was it like?
Yeah, it was really nerve-wracking. So I practiced, I don't know, like 1,000 times, and I still didn't feel ready. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna mess this up. Because I mean, there's really not any way to prepare for that kind of experience for the first time. And so I had to go to school in the morning, and I like couldn't concentrate on anything. I was just like so scared. And so it was a very, very long day until we finally got to, it was like 7 or 8 o'clock or something. And so I'm like up on the stage that's like the auditorium is so full, you can't, I don't know. Yeah, I couldn't even see the back of it with like the lights and stuff. And I think what stands out the most to me was that when you're in like a big room like that with a microphone, there's this really weird echo. Like your voice, you hear it twice. And so that's probably the most I remember while giving the speech.
Just kind of black out, right, when you start.
I was like trying not to get screwed up by the voice echo.
Yeah. Did you get like a round of applause at the end?
Yeah.
You didn't screw it up?
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah.
How'd you feel when it was over?
Very, very relieved.
Kind of woke back up, right?
Yeah.
So it was very cool. I mean, I've been, since I went out to the regional science fair, I was out at FGCU, right, in their arena there.
Yeah.
And that's when you won Best of Fair. So I've kind of been, following your science fair career, if you can say it, ever since then. And very interesting, and I'm kind of excited to see, where you go. So what are your future goals? Where do you want to go to school? What do you want to study? And, maybe eventually what kind of career do you want to have?
Well, I'm, applying to a lot of colleges. I definitely don't want to say anywhere particular because I don't know where I've gotten into. But yeah. So I would like to major in astrophysics. It'll probably be like a physics major undergrad because usually you'll do like something general undergrad and then grad school you'll go more specialized. But I already mentioned like theoretical astrophysics, not really my forte. So I would really like to do like kind of a hybrid of observational and computational astronomy. So it would be like designing models computationally and then kind of verifying those using like telescope observations and stuff. So exactly what topic I would want to explore, that's the journey I'm looking forward to in college.
Yeah. But astronomy related in some capacity, because that's your
Absolutely.
favorite kind of science. What other than astronomy, what other kind of science do you like?
Well, in school, I mean, because you don't really get like the opportunity to take astronomy stuff in school. So it's mainly like I take biophysics, chem. I do really enjoy chemistry. I don't know, it's just like a lot of different things, like a lot of different types of thinking are involved. So yeah, I like that.
What is it about astronomy that speaks to you?
I guess it's hard to hard to put into words.
It was. I think astronomy was always my favorite
Yeah,
science when I was going through school too. I just found out whatever it is about it, just the unknown,
Yeah.
and there's just so much more to explore.
yeah. It never like I don't know. It's always just like this like really really like slightly scary, like really cool feeling that I get. Like I'll just look up and when you think about how everything beyond our like sky is out there and we just spend like 90% of our day not really thinking about it, the more for some people is just like mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
And so I feel like studying astronomy for the rest of my life is essentially like getting to just daydream and like have the best time.
Is there some question about what's out there that you want to try to answer?
I don't know. I don't know if there's like a specific question, like the theory of everything. I'm not really in it for the theory of everything. I think a lot of people are, trying to answer the
theory
big
of everything
questions.
for people who?
I think a lot of it is uniting like quantum physics and general relativity, and just coming up with this like perfect theory that describes the universe.
Gotcha.
Answering the big questions basically. But I think I'm just kind of in it for like the small beauties that you find along the way. Like I have gotten into like astrophotography, so I've used some of that really awesome science fair money to get like a telescope and stuff. And so just last night I was like out taking pictures, and it's like the coolest thing when you'll see like the Dumbbell Nebula or like some like spiral galaxy that you can like see with your own eyes, and just like exploring that for yourself is so inspiring to me and so exciting. And like every time I see some kind of really cool space picture, like I never fail to get excited about it.
Yeah.
So,
Do you follow astronomy related news a lot and read a lot? Is there anything that you've read recently that any like recent discoveries that have really excited you that you've read about?
Well, I think obviously I know that the InSight rover just landed on Mars, and I thought that was really cool. I think it's really exciting to think about like the future of space travel. And I was actually listening to a podcast speak about like the necessity of space travel and like the future of the human race and stuff. And that's all like super fascinating to me, even though I don't think I could be an engineer. I do think it's really interesting to follow like space missions and just like the amazing things that we accomplish. When you think about how hard it is to land this like robotic thing on a piece of rock like millions of miles away. It's crazy.
Yeah, that was NASA's, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about what Elon Musk is doing over at SpaceX and all that? And he talking about it's his goal to eventually get the first person to Mars.
I think that's really fascinating. Definitely, I mean, private space exploration is the future, no doubt. I mean, we all know the government doesn't have enough money to to do all that stuff. But I'm really fascinated to see where it goes. I think it's just like in its infancy at this point. But definitely, if we're going to go anywhere, it's going to be probably with at least the assistance of private spaceflight companies.
Yeah. Do you think that in your lifetime that you'll see a man or woman land on Mars? Probably be a group of people, actually.
I don't know. I mean, because we've said it since practically the 60s.
Yeah.
I think we need to get back to the moon first. And that was...
when was the last time somebody went on the moon?
I don't know. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like I've read they're working on the new space launch system, which is supposed to be like the rocket that takes us to Mars and stuff. And I believe I've read that one of their like beginning missions is going to be going back to the moon.
Just as kind of like a test run almost.
Yeah. And I think there's like a lot of that capability that we've lost because we've just been doing like robotic spacecraft, and so we need to kind of like get our bearings with human manned space travel again. And but yeah, there's definitely a lot of engineering challenges with going to Mars. But I think it's interesting because a common thing that people might say is, oh, why are we spending all this money trying to go to Mars when we have so many problems on Earth? And it is a valid criticism, but I think people tend to overlook how many of the problems facing us today can be solved by figuring out how to take a bunch of people to Mars. Because essentially, to get to Mars, it takes 7 minutes to even hear back from Mars transmissions to get to Earth. So you essentially have to develop like a self-sustaining ecosystem inside a spacecraft for that to even be feasible, which is something that we haven't managed to do yet with people. And so there's just so many things, like environmentally, technology-wise, that innovations that would stem from learning how to go to Mars that could definitely be applied.
Discoveries made along the way that they weren't necessarily trying to implement here on Earth, but they could discover something in the course of their research and development of trying to get to Mars that, oh, hey, we just discovered something that could really benefit people here on Earth. So is that something that you would be interested, like maybe working for NASA or SpaceX one day? Is that?
I think working for NASA would be awesome. I do know a lot of what they do is engineering related, and while I find that really fascinating, I think I would definitely want to stick on the research side with astrophysics. But where I'm gonna work in the future is
who knows? Yeah, you're
so
still
far.
in high school.
Yeah.
What is it about just science in general, the scientific process, that you really enjoy?
Well, I think it's interesting in terms of like mankind as a whole, because we all like go through life with subjective experiences. That's like inherently, part of being human is we all have these different perspectives, and we kind of have these like a lot of times it seems like we have like irreconcilable differences, and it's hard for anyone to agree on anything. But the beautiful thing about science, one of the many beautiful things about science, is that it's this attempt to get the most objective view of reality possible in this single like unified understanding of the world around us.
To get to the truth.
Yeah.
So
if
that's what you like,
truth,
just discovering. Yeah. What is truth, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so my next question is what. So we talked about your past projects. So what are you working on? You said that the next science fair is coming up in January.
Yeah.
So it's right around the corner.
Yeah.
So obviously I'm assuming that you're submitting a project. So what are you working on right now?
I'm taking what I did last year in a slightly different direction. Doing even more of a computational focus than before. So I'm looking at a statistical analysis of the Kepler candidate stars. So that means that stars that have been confirmed to like host exoplanets and their exoplanets. So I'm analyzing various physical properties like orbital radius, mass, metallicity, things like that in the stars. And then from those Kepler light curves that I was studying, I'm determining the orbital elements of their exoplanets and validating that according to the Kepler data. So I'm trying to automate that whole process. And then I'm going to do like a really in-depth statistical analysis of the physical characteristics using most likely like some support vector machine type apparatus to attempt to develop like a probabilistic model. So say I have a star with XYZ characteristics, I can have a program that spits out an approximate estimate of the probability of that star hosting a planetary system, because research suggests that there's definitely various properties of stars that would make them more likely to be formed with a protoplanetary disk and for planets to evolve. And so I think there's a lot we can learn by analyzing that statistical data, not necessarily looking at finding future exoplanets, because when we're looking, this was more applicable in the Kepler era. So when you are trying to look for new exoplanets, you have to decide where to look to begin with, right? And so if we have a better understanding of what stars are more likely to host exoplanets that makes the whole process a lot more efficient.
How far along are you in the project at this point?
Well, I
Are
am
almost done, halfway?
I would say about halfway.
Yeah.
College applications have been a rough thing to manage. But yeah, definitely about halfway. And usually, I get to regionals, I just try to have like a finished project, but then I expand a lot before, if I make it to states and, if I make it back to internationals, it's kind of a work in progress along the way.
So how long from start to finish when you work on a project and it's just you, right?
Yep.
Doing this whole project by yourself, no help, right? Oh. For the most part. I mean, you have help from teachers learning about how to. I don't know where I'm going with that. It's all you. So from start to finish, how long does it take?
Oh gosh.
How many hours of research and experimenting?
I always wish I had recorded the hours, and like I always start out and I'm like, I'm gonna record the hours, and then I don't record the hours.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
So when did you start? Like when was day one of this one that you were working on?
It was like August.
August. Yeah. Okay. So it's been a few months now.
Yeah, and it's usually some weeknights and the weekend. I would very rough approximation would be like maybe 15, sometimes 20 hours a week. Yeah.
So are you involved in other extracurriculars, or does this pretty much take up most of your time outside of school?
Yeah, science fair is something that I try my very best to fit in along the sidelines. So I am involved in sailing, academic team, math team, just a variety of other things. I'm a board member on the I Will Mentorship Foundation, which is an organization that does like outreach here in Florida. I've hosted some computer science workshops in various capacities for kids and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, you better get into all those schools that you're applying to. I ran into Mr. Hughes in the hallway the other day, and I told him that you were coming on the podcast, and he mentioned something that we might talk about. Is he said that you traveled over the summer for research?
I did.
Where'd you go?
I went to New Mexico. Okay. So I was actually selected to attend the summer science program in astrophysics. It's co-sponsored by MIT, Caltech, and Harvey Mudd. And so with 35 other people, we flew to the middle of the New Mexican desert, essentially, at New Mexico Tech in
3,500 people, is that what you said?
Or, no, it was 35 people.
Oh.
So there were 36 of us, and we were out in...
I thought I heard 3,500.
Oh, no. And so, there were 36 of us. We were out in New Mexico for 39 days, and we each did research using the observatory there to define the orbital elements. So essentially you're calculating the trajectory of a near Earth asteroid. So my team and I, we did the asteroid 1911 MT, which is also, we affectionately called it Albert. That's his colloquial name. And so we calculated its orbital elements, simulated its trajectory like millions of years into advance to kind of see like the decay of its orbit and, where it ends up going. Ours is ejected from the solar system, so it won't be hitting Earth anytime soon. But it was really just this like amazing experience. My first hands-on experience with like observatory telescopes and protocols and doing all the aspects of astronomy. So like analytical, when you're analyzing like data. So you do your your astrometry. To get like the coordinates of your asteroid, photometry to determine the magnitude. And it was essentially just like a whole lot of coding to calculate the trajectory. But it was a really amazing experience. Yeah.
So how long were you there? Most of the summer or?
39 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was just 36 of you. Who are the other people that were there? Other students?
Yeah, there were kids from around the country. There were I think like 5 or 6 kids from like international. And so yeah, it was quite a diverse bunch of kids, and so it was us, and then we had like 4 TAs and 2 academic directors. Yeah.
So that had nothing to do with the project that you're working on for Science Fair?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you have a favorite scientist that you really admire? That
There's so many.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
You can talk about more than one if you like.
Favorite astrophysicist would have to be Carl Sagan, hands down, just because like he was the one who introduced it all to me with Cosmos. And, I tend to admire the scientists who have like this rare gift for expressing their love of science in a poetic way. And, that's something that I would aspire to do, if I end up being able to make a career in astronomy. I'd really like to try to write about it, for the general public in that magical way, try to kind of, get people inspired. And so Carl Sagan was definitely probably my biggest role model in astronomy, but the first scientist who made me kind of realize that science is this beautiful thing was Rachel Carson. So I read Silent Spring and some of her other books like The Edge of the Sea.
Who is she? Tell me about her.
She was the one who ended up essentially leading the cause to get DDT banned in the United States. So she was an environmentalist. And
20th century?
Yeah. Yeah, it would have been like, I think like the 60s,
Okay.
mid 20th century. But yeah, she ended up getting DDT banned because that was, a really harmful pesticide that people were just using like all over the place.
Yeah.
And it was killing the birds. And so she was one of the first to realize that. And she wrote Silent Spring. It was a huge hit, and it had a really big effect on, getting DDT banned in the United States and around the world. And in her books, she writes this beautiful prose about like, the edge of the sea and the wildlife you find there and these like little tiny infinities. And that was the first really magical science writing that I ever read.
Cool. Did you feel kind of a special connection to her too because she's a woman and that
Absolutely.
it's probably male dominated field?
Yeah. It's hard to find like prominent female astrophysicists at least. And so, yeah, I definitely, it's kind of different when you read like a woman's perspective in like science literature. And so, definitely reading that, she was the first like scientist that I aspired to be. Yeah.
Cool. Do you like watching like science fiction movies about space? I know that I've listened to, Neil deGrasse Tyson. He loves to like, nitpick science, space movies and say, oh, that would never happen, or that's not the way it is. And are you like that? Do you watch movies and say, well, that's not how it really is, and that's not scientifically accurate? Or
I don't know. I don't watch too much sci-fi.
Yeah, you have
like
no time, probably.
I've never seen the original Star Wars. I've only seen the new ones. I know.
Get out of here.
I know.
You can leave now.
Never seen Star Trek. So I mean, those are the big ones.
But some recent ones like Gravity or Interstellar.
Yeah, I really enjoy those. My family won't watch Interstellar with me because they say it's too long. And I really like it though, even though some things are slightly questionable. Yeah.
It's a confusing movie. I've seen it like 3 times and I'm trying to figure out how to wrap it around my head. All right. Well, so do you have any, I know you mentioned sailing. Do you have any other hobbies outside of, what you do with science fair and experimenting and sailing? Anything else that you're interested in that you want to talk about?
Well, sure. Astrophotography is still a very nerdy astronomy thing, but it is something that I do outside of science fair. And so I'll, whenever it's cold and clear, which is rare in Florida, but
I'll rare about now though, right?
Yeah. So now's the time, and so I'll go out, and even though it's a school night, I'll be out till like 3:30 in the morning, like taking pictures, and
you can stay awake the next day at school.
Oh yeah, I found by necessity that I tend to do well with little sleep, which is probably one of my strengths. Proud of that. But
I've read that. Not to make any assumptions about you, but I've read that introverts can handle less sleep than extroverted people can.
I think that's probably true. Yeah. But it's something that's super fun. So, and I can do it while multitasking. So astrophotography involves, especially since we're in a light polluted area in Fort Myers, you take a lot of exposures, maybe like 90 seconds or so, and you just like stack them. So, for example, like last night I was photographing a spiral galaxy. It's NGC 891. And so I took like 80, 90-second exposures, which understandably takes a long time. And so I would basically just like cue that up and then go inside and do like homework and stuff and then come back and check on it. Yeah.
What kind of camera do you use?
It's a CCD. So a lot of people do like DSLR.
Yeah.
But where I was in New Mexico, that kind of like got me introduced to, like real astrophotography. Like before I could just like look at Saturn and be like, oh, that's cool. But, now I like kind of know what I'm doing. And so I use a CCD. That's an acronym for Charge Coupled Device. And so I originally got one last year to do like actual science fair research. And then this year I'm just using it for fun.
Are those more expensive than a DSLR? Or
not necessarily. No. The nice ones are.
Yeah.
But the one I use is like cheaper than your average like camera. Yeah.
Gotcha. So sailing. How often do you sail?
Well, I used to do it quite often. I haven't had time in the past year or so. But
something you grew up doing out on Sanibel, or?
Yeah, I started like 7th grade. Went to a summer camp and loved it, and so I've done it ever since. But like freshman, sophomore year, I was really involved. So I usually sail like on Saturdays and then like one day during the week. And so I do like regattas around the state. I sail single-handed and double-handed boats. And that's just like a really a lot of the college I'm asking to, they ask like, what's something that you do just for fun? So sailing is that for me.
Are there sailing clubs that you?
Yeah,
I'm sure around here there's so much water. There's got to be sailing clubs, right?
Yeah, I mean, we started like a sailing club at school, but we all sail through Edison Sailing Center.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any harrowing stories of sailing?
I don't know. It does.
Or just
it's kind of a funny sport because like when there's no wind, you're basically just like sitting there. But then when there is wind, it's quite chaotic.
Yeah.
But it's a really fun time. I mean, just like basically, there's something called a hiking strap. So the boats that we sail are like maybe like 10 feet long. So it's really pretty tiny. You're just kind of sitting there, and there's this little strap in the center. And so when it gets windy, you want to push more weight outside of the boat to keep the boat down. So you essentially like hang from your toes off this strap in the middle of the boat, and you're like flying, kind of, which is like a really awesome thing. Slightly scary, but it tends to get real interesting when there's a lot of wind and you have big metal bars whipping around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And it's cool that you've been able to kind of combine your two interests. When the project you did a couple of years ago involving reading the wind and predicting the future and stuff to implement into sailing. That's all the questions I really have for you. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
I don't know. I think that's good for me.
I know you have a final here.
I do.
In a couple hours. So good luck with that.
Thank you.
And good luck with your future science fair projects, and good luck with your college applications. And we'll be following you and excited about your future. I'm sure you'll do great things. So thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely.
All right, Dahlia Dry, senior at Fort Myers High School. Thank you for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.